If you can't put this weapon back together in under 60 seconds, you're dead. And if you are dead, your squad is dead. And if your squad is dead, the enemy breaks the line. The drill sergeant's voice was tearing the lining of the recruits' eardrums, echoing off the concrete walls of the armory like a shock wave. Metal clanged against metal, the chaotic, desperate sound of 50 young men and women panic-fumbling with 84 pounds of cold, unforgiving steel. This is the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun, the Ma Deuce. It has been the backbone of heavy infantry support for a century. It is a beast that demands respect, and right now it was chewing these recruits up and spitting them out. If you've ever felt the pressure of a deadline that felt like life or death, hit that like button. If you think the old ways are still the best ways, comment old school below. Because today, a room full of panicked youth is about to learn that muscle memory doesn't have an expiration date. The air in the assembly bay was thick enough to chew. It smelled of CLP gun oil, stale sweat, and fear. 50 recruits stood at 50 tables. In front of them lay the disassembled carcasses of 50 heavy machine guns. Barrels, backplates, bolt groups, driving spring rods, scattered like complex metallic puzzles. The recruits were the best of their intake. Top physical scores, high IQs, digital natives who could fly a drone with a tablet or code a firewall in their sleep. But this was mechanical, this was heavy, this was analog, and they were failing miserably. Time remaining, 15 seconds, Sergeant Halloway barked, checking his stopwatch. At table 4, Recruit Davis was hyperventilating. His hands were slick with oil and sweat. He was trying to jam the bolt stud into the receiver, but his alignment was off. His fingers were shaking so bad he looked like he was vibrating. He was the platoon leader, the golden boy, the one who bragged he'd be general in 20 years. Right now, he couldn't even manage a simple mechanical function. He cursed under his breath, slamming the metal part down in frustration. "Jamming it won't make it fit, Davis," Halloway screamed, leaning into his face. "You're fighting the weapon. The weapon always wins." "It's the spring, drill sergeant. It's bent," Davis yelled back, desperate to shift the blame. "This kit is garbage. It's ancient." "Time," Halloway yelled. "Hands off. Step back." The silence that followed was heavy with shame. 50 recruits stepped back. Not a single gun was fully assembled. Springs hung out of receivers, barrels weren't seated, backplates were loose. It was a massacre. Halloway walked down the line, shaking his head. He looked disgusted. These kids were soft. They relied on technology, on heads-up displays, on assists. They didn't understand the iron. Standing quietly in the corner of the bay, leaning on a push broom, was an old man. He wore a faded blue janitor's jumpsuit that was a size too big for his shrinking frame. His name was Thomas. Most of the recruits didn't even know his name. To them, he was just the old guy who emptied the trash cans and mopped up the mud they tracked in. He had thick glasses that magnified his eyes, making him look perpetually surprised, and his hands were gnarled, the knuckles swollen with arthritis. He was 80 years old, moving with a slow, shuffling gait that made it painful just to watch him walk. Thomas had been watching the test. He hadn't said a word. He just leaned on his broom, his eyes fixed on the chaotic piles of metal on the tables. "Pathetic," Halloway muttered, stopping at the front of the room. "The enemy is cresting the ridge. They are 300 meters out, and you are all standing there with a pile of scrap metal. You are all dead." Davis, stung by the failure and the humiliation, saw the old janitor watching him. He needed a target, someone to vent his frustration on. "Hey," Davis snapped, pointing a greasy finger at Thomas. "What are you looking at, Pops? You got something to say?" The room went quiet. Halloway turned, eyes narrowing. Attacking the civilian staff was a line you didn't cross, but Halloway was curious. He'd seen Thomas around for months, always quiet, always respectful. Thomas blinked, adjusting his glasses. "Just watching, son," he said. His voice was soft, gravelly, like tires rolling over loose stones. "Just watching?" "Well, don't," Davis sneered. "Unless you want to come over here and show us how to clean up this mess, stick to your broom. This is for soldiers. This is modern warfare." Thomas looked at the broom handle, his grip tightening slightly. Then he looked at the scattered parts of the M2 Browning on Davis's table. A strange look passed over his face. Not anger, but a deep, melancholic familiarity. It was the look of a man seeing an old lover after 50 years. "Modern warfare," Thomas repeated, almost to himself. That gun isn't modern, son. That gun is older than your father. It's older than me." "Yeah, and it belongs in a museum," Davis shot back. "Just like you." Thomas slowly let go of the broom. It clattered to the floor. The sound echoed in the silent bay. He took a step forward, then another. The shuffle was gone. His stride was short but steady. He walked right past the drill sergeant, who watched him with a raised eyebrow, and stopped in front of Davis's table. "It doesn't belong in a museum," Thomas said, his voice hardening, losing the waver of age. "It belongs in the hands of someone who respects it, someone who knows its heartbeat." Davis laughed. It was a cruel, mocking sound. "Heartbeat? It's a chunk of steel, old man. And it's complicated. The tolerances are tight. You need dexterity. No offense, but look at your hands. You can barely hold a mop." Thomas held up his hands. They were trembling slightly. The arthritis was real. The weakness was real. But then he looked at Holloway. "Drill sergeant," Thomas said. "May I?" Holloway looked at the recruits, then at the old man. He saw something in Thomas's posture. The slouch was gone. The shoulders were squared. "Be my guest, Thomas. Show them how you clean a table." "No," Thomas said. "I'm not cleaning the table. I'm assembling the weapon." The recruits snickered. Davis shook his head in disbelief. "You're gonna hurt yourself, Pops. That barrel weighs 24 pounds. And," Thomas added, ignoring the boy, "I'm going to do it blindfolded." The laughter stopped. It was replaced by a confused murmur. Blindfolded? The M2 was notorious for its complexity. The headspace and timing adjustments alone required precise visual checks. Doing it blind was impossible. Doing it blind with arthritic hands at 80 years old was a delusion. "You're crazy," Davis said. "Get me a blindfold," Thomas ordered. He didn't ask. He ordered. The tone was unmistakable. It was the tone of command. Holloway felt a chill run down his spine. He pulled a black bandana from his pocket, used for night op simulations, and handed it to Thomas. "Thomas, you don't have to do this. They're just punks." Thomas took the cloth. "They aren't punks, Sergeant. They're soldiers who think the world started when they were born. They need to learn." Thomas stood before the table. He took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of the oil. It was the smell of 1952. It was the smell of the Chosin Reservoir. It was the smell of the Ashau Valley in '68. It was a smell that never left you. He tied the blindfold tight. The world went black. And in the darkness, the trembling in his hands stopped. "Time me," Thomas whispered. "Ready," Holloway said, his thumb on the stopwatch. "Go." Thomas didn't rush. That was the first thing the recruits noticed. He didn't scramble like they had. His hands moved with a fluid, liquid grace. He reached out and touched the receiver, orienting himself. His fingers didn't fumble. They danced. The barrel extension group slid into the receiver. The bolt group followed. Thomas wasn't seeing the parts. He was feeling them. He was listening to them. To the recruits, it was a jumble of metal. To Thomas, it was a song. He knew the exact weight of the buffer body. He knew the texture of the driving spring rod. Snap. The bolt stud was inserted. Davis had struggled with this for 20 seconds. Thomas did it in 2. He didn't force it. He waited for the metal to align, sensing the gap with his fingertips, and slid it home with a gentle persuasion that looked like magic. 20 seconds, Holloway called out, his eyes wide. Thomas picked up the back plate. This was the hardest part. You had to compress the heavy driving spring and lock the plate in place simultaneously. It required brute strength. Thomas was 80. He didn't have the muscle mass of the young recruits, but he had leverage. He braced the receiver against his hip, a move not found in the manual, but learned in the mud of a foxhole when you were too tired to stand. He used his body weight, leaning into the spring. The back plate locked. The recruits were leaning forward now. Mouths were open. Davis looked like he had seen a ghost. Thomas wasn't done. He moved to the barrel. He lifted the heavy steel tube. He threaded it into the barrel extension. This was the critical moment. Headspace. If you screwed it in too tight, the gun jammed. Too loose, and the case ruptured, exploding the gun in your face. Usually you used a go-no-go gauge to measure it. Thomas didn't have a gauge. He had his ears. He screwed the barrel in. Click, click, click. He paused. He unscrewed it 1 click. Clack. He tapped the side of the receiver. He listened to the resonance. He screwed it back in 2 clicks. Headspace is set, Thomas whispered. He reached for the charging handle. He racked the bolt. Ka-chunk! The sound was crisp, solid, authoritative. It was the sound of a weapon ready to fire. Time! Holloway shouted. He looked at the watch. He blinked. He looked again. 45 seconds. The room was absolutely silent. 45 seconds. The passing grade was 60. The instructor standard was 50. Thomas had done it in 45. Blindfolded. Thomas reached up and untied the bandana. He blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights, the confused old janitor mask slipping back into place for a moment, but his eyes remained sharp. He looked at the weapon. It was perfect. He turned to Davis. The young recruit was pale. He looked at the gun, then at Thomas's hands. Check it, Thomas said to Holloway. Holloway stepped forward. He checked the back plate. Locked. He checked the bolt stud. Seated. He pulled the headspace and timing gauge from his pocket and inserted it into the breech. He slid it around. It was perfect. Not just good enough. It was mathematically perfect. It's perfect, Holloway said. How? Thomas wiped his greasy hands on his jumpsuit. You kids, he said, his voice echoing in the quiet bay. You treat the weapon like it's a machine. You fight it. You try to force it to do what you want. You think because you're strong, you can bully the steel. He walked over to Davis and placed a hand on the cold barrel of the gun. This isn't a machine, Thomas said. This is your life. When it's dark, when it's raining, when you can't see your hand in front of your face and the enemy is coming over the wire, this is the only friend you have. You don't muscle it. You don't force it. You listen to it. He looked at his hands. I carried a Ma Deuce in Korea in 1950. The temperature was 30 below zero. If you took your gloves off, your skin stuck to the metal. We had to assemble these in the dark with frozen fingers, while mortar rounds were landing in the perimeter. You learn to do it blind, or you die. Then I carried one in Vietnam. The heat was so bad the barrel would glow white. Different war, same gun. It never changed. It never let me down, because I respected it. He looked directly at Davis. You called me a museum piece. Maybe I am, but this museum piece is still operational. And you're just a tourist. Davis swallowed hard. The arrogance was gone. He looked at the old man, really looked at him, and saw the scars on his neck, the way he stood, the quiet lethality that had been hiding under the janitor's uniform. Who are you? Davis whispered. Thomas, Holloway interjected, looking at the file on his tablet he had just pulled up, his eyes widening as he read the personnel record he had never bothered to check before. Master Gunner Thomas Miller, retired 1975. 3 tours, Silver Star, 2 Purple Hearts, and the record holder for the M2 assembly at Fort Benning, 1968. Holloway looked up. "You're the gunner, the ghost of the Iron Triangle." Thomas shrugged, picking up his broom. "I'm just the janitor, Sergeant. I just clean up the mess." He started to walk away, the shuffle returning to his step. "You boys have a lot of work to do. That headspace on table 3 is loose. Table 7 has a jammed spring. And Davis?" Davis snapped to attention, purely on instinct. "Yes, sir." Thomas didn't look back. "Respect the equipment. It doesn't care who your daddy is. It only cares if you know what you're doing." Thomas pushed the door open and walked out into the hallway, leaving 50 stunned recruits and 1 awestruck drill sergeant in his wake. Holloway turned back to the platoon. "Well," he roared, breaking the spell, "you heard the master gunner. Tear them down. We are doing it again, and this time, close your eyes. If an 80-year-old man can out-soldier you, you don't deserve to wear that uniform. Move!" The chaos returned, but it was different this time. The panic was gone. It was replaced by a focused intensity. Davis tied his bandana around his eyes. He took a deep breath. He didn't try to force the bolt. He felt for it. He remembered the sound of the click. He remembered the old man's hands. Thomas Miller might have been retired. He might have been a janitor. But that day, he was the only instructor in the room who mattered. He taught them that technology changes, uniforms change, and wars change. But the fundamentals, the iron, the discipline, that is eternal. And as for Thomas, he went back to his closet, sat down on a crate, and rubbed his aching hands. He smiled to himself. He could still hear the clicks in his head. He could still feel the cold steel of the Chaussin Reservoir. He was old, yes, but he wasn't obsolete. Not yet. There is a lesson here that goes beyond guns and war. We live in a world that is obsessed with the new. New phones, new apps, new methods. We discard the old as if it has no value. We dismiss the elderly as if their experience is irrelevant in the digital age. But Thomas showed us that true mastery isn't about the tools you have. It's about the skill in your hands and the heart in your chest. Experience is a library. That burned down is a tragedy, but a library ignored is a crime. Respect your elders. They have walked paths you cannot imagine. They have fought demons you will never see. And sometimes, just sometimes, they can still do it better than you can blindfolded. If this story reminded you of the value of experience, if it made you want to call your grandfather and ask him a story, hit that subscribe button. We tell the stories of the unsung heroes, the quiet warriors, and the lessons we should never forget. Share this video with someone who thinks they know it all. Let's remind them that the old guard is still standing watch. Until next time, keep your headspace checked and your timing perfect. Dismissed.